I'm Amelia, 34 years old, and until recently, just a regular graphic designer with a modest life. Then my grandmother Eleanor left me her historic Nantucket mansion, valued at $180 million. My husband James and I had always been happy together, or so I thought. But the moment that inheritance entered our lives, I saw a side of my mother-in-law Diana I never knew existed. I never imagined that my grandmother's final gift would turn my marriage into a battlefield and force me to choose between family peace and my own dignity. Before I continue my story, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop a comment below, hit that like button and subscribe if you want to hear more stories like mine. The story of how I ended up in this nightmare begins long before the inheritance. My grandmother Eleanor was a renowned art collector and philanthropist who built an empire from her passionate eye for undiscovered artists. Despite my family's wealth, my parents chose a simpler path. My father was a high school art teacher, and my mother ran a small bookstore. They wanted me to understand the value of hard work rather than entitlement. Still, every summer I visited grandmother Eleanor at her breathtaking Nantucket estate. Those summers shaped who I am. Grandmother would walk me through the gardens, naming every flower, explaining the history behind each painting on the walls. Amelia, she'd tell me, beauty must be preserved and shared, not sold to the highest bidder. By the time I was 12, I could distinguish a Monet from a Manet and knew the stories behind every room in that 14-bedroom mansion that had been in our family since 1887. I met James in my second year at art school. I was studying graphic design while he pursued architecture. He was brilliant, passionate about sustainable design, and had this infectious laugh that made everyone around him smile. After a 7-year romance that took us from cramped student apartments to our first real home, we married in a simple ceremony at my parents' backyard. James never seemed interested in my family's wealth. In fact, he rarely asked about it, which I found refreshing. His family was another story entirely. The Prestons were old money, as they say, though the actual money had apparently dwindled over generations. Diana Preston, my mother-in-law, maintained the appearance of wealth through carefully curated social connections and her volunteer work chairing various charity boards. William James's father was quiet and diplomatic, always smoothing over his wife's sharp edges with a gentle word or distracting comment. Lauren James's younger sister became my ally from the start. She rolled her eyes behind her mother's back and whispered explanations of family dynamics during those tense early holiday dinners. From the beginning, Diana's approval of me was paper thin. "How quaint that you work in commercial art," she'd say, making commercial sound like a disease. Or, "I suppose graphic design is a sensible career for someone with your background." I tried everything to win her over, bringing thoughtful gifts, complimenting her impeccable taste, even volunteering for her favorite charities. Nothing worked. James assured me she was just like that with everyone. But I noticed how differently she treated his college friends from acceptable families. When grandmother Eleanor fell ill 2 years ago, I took leave from my job to help care for her. James supported my decision, though he seemed uncomfortable during our weekend visits to the mansion. Eleanor's decline was slow and painful, but it gave us precious time together. In those final months, she shared family stories I'd never heard and made me promise to keep the legacy alive. I thought she meant continuing her philanthropic work, not that she planned to leave me everything. The day the lawyer read the will, I thought Diana might faint. To my beloved granddaughter, Amelia Hayes Preston, I leave my entire estate, including the Nantucket property at 67 Harbour View Lane, all structures thereon, all contents, including art collections, furnishings, and personal items, as well as the associated maintenance fund and investments. The room went silent. The property alone was worth $180 million, but with the art collection and investments, the inheritance approached $250 million. Diana's congratulations came through clenched teeth. "How wonderful for you, dear." Her eyes told a different story. This was war. James squeezed my hand and whispered, "Wow, babe, that's amazing." But something in his voice sounded hollow. I should have recognized it then, the first crack in our foundation. That night, as we drove home, James was unusually quiet. When I asked what he was thinking, he said, "That's an awful lot of responsibility. We should talk about selling it." I laughed, thinking he was joking. The mansion had been in my family for generations. My grandmother had just made me promise to preserve it. Why would I sell it immediately? "I'm serious, Amelia," he said. "That place costs a fortune to maintain. The property taxes alone must be astronomical, and it's so far from our lives here. It would make more sense to sell it, keep a portion for ourselves, and maybe share some with the family." "Share with the family?" I asked. "Your family, you mean? Because Grandmother Eleanor specifically left it to me, not to your parents." "Don't be like that," James snapped. "I'm just trying to avoid complications. You know how these things can tear families apart?" Little did I know our family was already being torn apart, not by my decision to keep the house, but by the resentment and greed that had been lying dormant, waiting for an opportunity. Diana's first friendly visit came just 3 days later. She arrived with an expensive bottle of champagne and brochures from 3 different luxury real estate agencies. "I've taken the liberty of setting up meetings," she announced, pouring champagne without asking if I wanted any. "These agencies specialize in properties of distinction. They're very discreet." "That's thoughtful, Diana," I said carefully, "but I don't plan to sell the house." Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes hardened. "Don't be hasty, dear. That property is a white elephant. The maintenance alone will bankrupt you, and the responsibility Eleanor had a full staff. Are you planning to manage all that while working your little design job?" For 2 hours she outlined all the reasons selling was the only sensible option. Go. The taxes, the maintenance, the distance, the insurance. With each point her voice grew more insistent, her gestures more animated. When I still wouldn't budge, she switched tactics. "Think about what you could do with that money, darling. You and James could buy a lovely home anywhere you want. Travel the world. Start a family with proper financial security. Eleanor would want you to be practical." "Actually," I said firmly, "Grandmother specifically asked me to keep the property in the family. She loved that house, and so do I." Diana left with a thin smile and a promise to continue this discussion when you've had time to think more clearly. 2 weeks later, she was back this time with a surprise dinner party that included 3 old family friends who just happened to be high-end property developers. I discovered their identities when I overheard one telling James, "We could offer 70% of market value for a quick private sale. No commissions, no hassle." That night, after everyone left, I confronted James. "Did you know your mother invited potential buyers to our home?" "They're just friends of the family," he deflected. "Mum thought it might be helpful to get some professional perspectives." "James, I heard them making offers." "You're overreacting," he said, not meeting my eyes. "No one's forcing you to do anything." But the pressure was just beginning. The next morning I woke early and found James in the kitchen speaking quietly on his phone. "She's being completely unreasonable, Mom." "I know, but I've tried." "Maybe if you talk to Dad about the financial angle." "Yes, I'm still working on her." He hung up quickly when he saw me. When I asked who he was talking to, he claimed it was a work colleague. That was the first direct lie of our marriage. I knew then something was deeply wrong. Over the following weeks, I pieced together the truth. Diana and William had been struggling financially for years. The recession had hit their investments hard, and they'd been maintaining appearances by selling assets and borrowing money. James's architectural firm was also in trouble. He'd taken loans from his parents to keep it afloat. The inheritance had seemed like the solution to everyone's problems, except I was now the obstacle. Diana's comments grew less subtle. "Selfishness is such an unattractive quality," she announced at Sunday dinner. "In our family, we've always believed in sharing good fortune." The irony that she'd never shared anything with me wasn't lost, but no one dared point it out. James started working late every night. When he was home, he was distant and irritable. Our conversations all circled back to the house and what we could do with all that money. When I suggested we visit the property together so he could see its value beyond the price tag, he always had an excuse. The more they pushed, the more determined I became to honour my grandmother's wishes. I started visiting the mansion regularly, learning about its maintenance from the staff who'd worked for Eleanor for decades. I discovered that my grandmother had set up a substantial fund specifically for the property's upkeep, something Diana had conveniently failed to mention in her financial doomsday scenarios. Far from being a burden, the estate was self-sustaining through careful management and the investment portfolio Eleanor had established. But understanding the financial reality didn't stop the Preston family offensive. If anything, it escalated it. One Sunday evening, I arrived at Diana and William's home for what James had described as just a casual family dinner. Instead, I walked into an ambush. Seated in the formal living room were James's parents, his uncle Robert, a financial advisor, his aunt Patricia, a real estate attorney, and a man introduced as Mr. Berkowitz. a family friend who specializes in estate planning. We're all here because we care about you, Amelia, Diana began with practiced sympathy. The burden Eleanor placed on you is simply unfair. For the next 2 hours, they took turns explaining why keeping the mansion was impractical, financially irresponsible, and even selfish. James sat silently beside me, offering neither support nor opposition. When I tried to explain the maintenance fund and my emotional connection to the property, Robert dismissed it as sentimentality over sense. James, I finally said, turning to my husband, do you agree with them? Do you think I should sell the house my grandmother explicitly wanted me to keep? All eyes turned to him. After an excruciating pause, he said, I think we need to be practical, Amelia. Mum and Dad have a point. The betrayal struck like a physical blow. In that moment, I realized I was completely alone against this united front. Diana must have sensed her advantage. Within days, she escalated her campaign beyond family boundaries. At a charity event, I overheard her telling her friends that she was so worried about dear Amelia, who was making concerning decisions since her grandmother's death. Grief affects people in strange ways, she said with theatrical concern. We're considering seeking professional help for her. The whispers spread quickly through our social circle. Friends began asking if I was doing okay, with strange looks of concern. One even suggested a therapist who specializes in inheritance trauma. I later discovered Diana had been systematically contacting anyone connected to me, painting a picture of mental instability. Then came the legal maneuvers. A casual comment from Lauren revealed that James and Diana had consulted an attorney about potentially challenging the will on grounds that I had unduly influenced Eleanor during her illness. The accusation was absurd. Eleanor had updated her will years before becoming ill, but the mere suggestion was devastating. Is that true? I confronted James that night. Are you and your mother trying to contest my grandmother's will? It was just an exploratory meeting. He admitted not even bothering to deny it. Mum wanted to understand our options. Our options? There are no our options, James. This was my grandmother's decision about her property, which affects our marriage and our future. He shouted, his calm facade finally cracking. You're being completely selfish about this. That fight led me to start investigating our finances more carefully. In our home office, I discovered statements showing James had borrowed over $300,000 from his parents in the last 2 years, loans I'd known nothing about. His architectural firm was nearly bankrupt, and he'd been hiding it from me while presenting a successful image. When confronted with the evidence, James broke down. Mum and Dad have been supporting the firm, he confessed. The loan comes due next month and I can't pay it back. They're counting on money from the house sale. We all are. Finally, the truth emerged. This wasn't about practicality or family sharing. It was about rescuing the Prestons from financial ruin using my inheritance. Diana's visits became increasingly hostile. She would arrive unannounced, walk through our home as if inspecting it, and make cutting remarks about my stubborn ingratitude. James no longer asked her to stop or defended me. Instead, he became her accomplice, using emotional manipulation where Diana used aggression. If you loved me, you'd at least consider selling, he would say, withdrawing affection until I felt I was living with a stranger. When I suggested marriage counselling, he initially refused, calling it a waste of money. Eventually he agreed, but in our first session, he portrayed me as irrational and fixated on wealth, completely inverting the reality. Amelia refuses to discuss selling a property we can't possibly use or maintain, he told the bewildered therapist. She's chosen a house over our marriage. The therapist, to her credit, suggested individual sessions before proceeding further. In my private session, she said something I'll never forget. Amelia, when someone tries this hard to make you question your reality, you need to ask what they're trying to hide or take. The breaking point came sooner than I expected. I had gone to visit my parents for the weekend, seeking refuge from the constant tension at home. My father had been experiencing health issues, and I welcomed the chance to care for my parents instead of defending myself from the Prestons. When I returned Sunday evening, I turned onto our street to find an unfamiliar moving truck parked in our driveway. As I got closer, I saw boxes stacked on the front lawn, boxes filled with my clothes, books, and personal belongings. James and Diana were directing 2 movers, while William stood awkwardly nearby, examining his shoes. "What is going on?" I demanded, jumping out of my car. Diana turned with a triumphant smile. "Amelia, good timing. We're just helping you relocate. James has decided he needs space to reconsider this marriage." "What?" I looked to James, who couldn't meet my eyes. "I'm sorry it came to this," he said to the ground. but you've made your choice pretty clear. The house matters more than us. I pushed past Diana toward our front door, but found it locked. My key no longer worked. Through the sidelight window, I could see more movers packing my office materials. You changed the locks. I was speechless with shock. This is my home too. Technically, it's James's house, Diana said smoothly. The mortgage is in his name. This was partly true. We'd bought the house when I was between jobs, so the mortgage was initially in his name alone, though I'd been making half the payment since finding steady work. You can't just throw me out of my own home. I tried again to enter, but Diana physically blocked me, placing her hand on my chest and pushing me back. Don't make a scene, she hissed. The neighbours are watching. Just accept that you've lost and move on. James has filed for divorce, and we expect a fair settlement. Half the value of that white elephant should do. The reality hit me all at once. This wasn't an impulsive action. This was a calculated move they'd planned while I was away, having movers ready, changing locks, preparing divorce papers. They'd waited until I was visiting my sick father to ambush me. I'm calling the police, I said, pulling out my phone. Go ahead, Diana laughed. Tell them your husband is asking you to leave his property. See how far that gets you. While I dialed, Diana instructed the movers to place another box on the lawn, this one containing framed photos of my grandmother. When I saw them being roughly handled, something in me snapped. I rushed forward to protect them, and Diana attempted to physically block me again. Don't touch me! I shouted loud enough that several neighbours came out to their porches. You have no right to touch my things or me. Security! Diana called toward the house as if summoning mole cops. We have a trespasser. By now a small crowd had gathered. Mrs. Tompkins from across the street approached cautiously. Amelia, honey, is everything okay? Should I call someone? I've already called the police, I said, tears streaming down my face. They're throwing me out of my own home, and they've changed the locks. Diana immediately went into performance mode. This is a private family matter, she announced to the onlookers. My son's marriage is ending because his wife has been hiding family assets and refusing to share her windfall. It's very sad when money changes people. That's not true, I protested, but my voice was choked with sobs. James finally approached, speaking quietly. Amelia, don't do this here. Just take your things and go to your parents. We can talk through lawyers. Talk through lawyers? After 7 years together, you lock me out of our home while I'm visiting my sick father, and that's all you have to say. The police arrived as James was trying to usher me toward my car. 2 officers approached, taking in the scene with professional caution, moving truck boxes on the lawn, crying, woman, uncomfortable man, imperious older woman, directing everyone. What's going on here? The taller officer asked. Diana jumped in before I could speak. Officer, this is a domestic matter. My son has asked his wife to leave while they separate, and she's refusing. Ma'am, I need to hear from the individuals involved, he said firmly, turning to me. Can you tell me what's happening? Through tears, I explained that I'd returned from visiting my parents to find myself locked out and my belongings on the lawn. The officer asked for identification, which I provided, showing my address matched the house. Do you have documentation showing you're on the mortgage or lease? He asked. The mortgage is in my husband's name, but I've made half the payments for years. I can show you bank records. The officer turned to James. Sir, is this your wife and does she live here with you? James looked miserable. Yes, but... Then this is her legal residence regardless of whose name is on the mortgage, the officer stated. You cannot legally lock her out without a court order, and removing her belongings could constitute illegal eviction and potentially theft. Diana stepped forward indignantly. Officer, you don't understand the situation. This woman has been hiding assets. Ma'am, step back, the officer said firmly. Any financial disputes need to be handled through proper legal channels. Right now I'm addressing a potential illegal eviction. He turned back to James. Sir, I need you to provide access to your wife's residence immediately. If there's a domestic issue requiring separation, you're free to leave, but you can't force her out without court proceedings. James looked at his mother in panic. Diana's face had turned a dangerous shade of red. This is outrageous, she exploded. Do you know who we are in this community? I'm on the Police Benevolent Association board. Ma'am, I need you to calm down, the officer warned. Are you a resident of this property? I'm his mother. That's not what I asked. If you're not a resident, you have no standing in this situation, and I'm going to have to ask you to step back. Diana was not accustomed to being dismissed. She's manipulating you. She inherited a $180 million property. that should have been shared with the family, and now she's being vindictive. The crowd of neighbours grew silent at the mentioned amount. The officer raised an eyebrow but maintained his professional demeanour. Again, ma'am, any financial disputes are civil matters. Right now I'm addressing the removal of this resident's property without due process, which is my immediate concern. To James he said, "Sir, the lock needs to be restored or changed so your wife has access and her belongings need to be returned inside. Now." James finally seemed to grasp the legal reality. "I'll call the locksmith," he muttered. "And in the meantime," the officer prompted, I guess we can put everything back." Diana was apoplectic. "James, don't you dare! We discussed this. She's trying to steal your birthright." "Ma'am," the officer said sternly, "I've asked you repeatedly to step back. If you continue to escalate this situation, I'll have to consider whether you're creating a public disturbance." This threat finally silenced Diana, though she continued to glare at me with undisguised hatred. The second officer, who had been quietly observing, approached me. "Would you like us to remain on scene while your belongings are returned to the residence, ma'am?" "Yes, please," I whispered, overwhelmed by the public humiliation, but grateful for their intervention. The officers supervised as James instructed the movers to bring everything back inside. Diana retreated to her car, but didn't leave, watching the proceedings with a thunderous expression. The neighbours gradually dispersed, though several gave me sympathetic looks or whispered offers of support. 3 hours later, the locksmith had replaced the locks, providing both James and me with new keys. The officers confirmed I had full access before departing with a warning to James about legal eviction processes and a business card pressed into my hand with a victim services number scrawled on the back. As the police car pulled away, James turned to me, his expression unreadable. "I hope you're satisfied with this spectacle. Satisfied you tried to throw me out of my own home, James? You left me no choice. You've chosen a house over our entire relationship. No, I refuse to let your mother dictate what happens with my inheritance. There's a difference." He shook his head in disgust. "I'll be staying at my parents'. We'll let the lawyers sort this out." Without another word, he walked to his car, where Diana waited, engine running. I stood in the doorway watching them drive away, then slowly closed and locked the door. In the sudden silence of our home, now just my home, I finally allowed myself to break down completely. I made my way to the guest room, unable to face our marital bed, and sobbed until exhaustion claimed me. The next morning, I woke to dozens of missed calls and text messages, mostly from James's family members, expressing shock and disappointment at my behaviour. Only Lauren had sent a different message. "I'm so sorry. This isn't right. Call me when you can." I sat in my grandmother Eleanor's study later that day, surrounded by her books and the few photos of her I'd managed to save from rough handling. "What would you do, Grandma?" I whispered to her smiling image. I could almost hear her firm voice. "Stand your ground, Amelia. Some treasures can't be measured in dollars." With shaking hands, I began researching divorce attorneys. This wasn't just about a marriage ending anymore. This was about protecting myself and my grandmother's legacy from people who saw it as nothing but a dollar amount to be seized. The weeks following the lockout incident were the most challenging of my life. On the advice of several friends, I contacted Sydney Montgomery, a formidable property attorney known for handling high-profile inheritance disputes. Her office was in a converted Victorian downtown, warm but professional, much like Sydney herself. So they attempted an illegal eviction while simultaneously planning to contest the inheritance, Sydney summarised after hearing my story. "And I assume your husband is filing for divorce with the expectation of receiving half the property value." That's what Diana said. I confirmed, still struggling to believe James would go that far. Sydney's expression was sympathetic but determined. "I've seen this pattern before. When large inheritances enter a marriage, it often reveals true colours, unfortunately not always pretty ones. The good news is that inherited property is typically considered separate property, not marital assets, especially when explicitly bequeathed to one spouse." The legal process moved quickly. James filed for divorce 3 days after the lockout, demanding half the value of the Nantucket property as part of the settlement. His filing claimed he had supported my relationship with my grandmother and contributed to the care that resulted in the inheritance. Both claims were blatantly false. James had visited Eleanor with me exactly 4 times in 7 years, and I had taken unpaid leave to care for her while he continued working. While the legal battle was painful, Diana's social warfare was equally devastating. She used her extensive connections to pressure me professionally, resulting in the loss of 3 graphic design clients connected to her charitable boards. "We're going in a different creative direction," they all said with identical awkward apologies. The financial impact became clear when I checked our accounts. James had emptied our joint savings, $43,000. We'd been setting aside for eventually starting a family, leaving only the minimum balance to keep the account open. My own checking account remained untouched, but I immediately opened new accounts at a different bank, fearing further financial sabotage. Nights were the hardest. Alone in the house we'd shared for 5 years, I questioned everything. Had James ever loved me, or had he and Diana always seen me as a potential financial asset? Had I been unreasonable about the house? Should I have offered some compromise? Each thought spiraled into deeper doubts about my worth beyond the inheritance. One night, around 2 a.m., my phone rang, James calling for the first time since moving out. Hoping for reconciliation, I answered. "Amelia?" His voice sounded slurred, possibly from alcohol. "Are you alone?" "Yes." "Are you okay, James?" "No, I'm not okay," he said bitterly. "My wife chose a pile of bricks over our marriage. That's not what happened. You know what Mom says. She says you planned this all along, getting close to your grandmother, manipulating her when she was sick." The accusation stole my breath. "That's disgusting, James. You know that's not true." I don't know what to believe anymore." His tone shifted suddenly, becoming plaintive. "It could be so simple, Amelia. Just sell the house. We could split it, start over somewhere new. We could be happy again. Happy after you tried to throw me out of our home, after your mother's campaign to paint me as mentally unstable." "She's just protecting me," he defended. "Look, the lawyers are expensive. This could drag on for years. Or you could be reasonable, and we could settle this privately." When I didn't immediately agree, his voice hardened. "You should know Mom's talking to a journalist friend about your story. How the sweet daughter-in-law turned into a gold digger overnight. How you're tearing apart a family that welcomed you. That's blackmail, James. It's reality. Think about it." He hung up, leaving me shaking with a mixture of anger and fear. The threatened article appeared 2 days later in the local lifestyle magazine, "Family Fortune When Inheritance Destroys Love." While it didn't name me directly, anyone in our social circle would recognize the thinly disguised details. Diana had provided family photos and quotes from sources close to the couple that portrayed me as calculating and cold. The public nature of the attack left me anxious about leaving the house. I developed insomnia, jumping at every sound, convinced Diana or James might try to enter again. My fear wasn't unfounded. While cleaning the home office, I discovered a small wireless camera hidden behind books on the shelf. The installation date on its app showed it had been placed there 2 weeks before the lockout attempt, suggesting James had been monitoring me. With this evidence, my attorney immediately filed for a temporary restraining order against both James and Diana. The judge granted it after reviewing the camera evidence and police report from the eviction attempt. While the order provided legal protection, it did little to ease my emotional devastation. I began experiencing panic attacks, moments when I couldn't breathe and my heart raced so fast I feared I was dying. My doctor prescribed anti-anxiety medication and recommended trauma therapy, gently suggesting that I was experiencing not just grief over my failed marriage, but symptoms of psychological abuse. Just when I felt most alone, my grandmother's presence returned to my life in an unexpected way. Victoria Holloway, Eleanor's oldest friend and bridge partner, reached out after seeing the magazine article. "Eleanor would be furious about this," she declared over tea in my kitchen. "She never cared for James, you know. Said he reminded her of her second husband, charming but always looking at her bank balance instead of her eyes." Victoria provided more than emotional support. She connected me with her nephew, a judge, who recommended an excellent divorce attorney to work alongside Sydney. She also invited me to the Nantucket mansion, which I'd been avoiding due to its connection to the conflict. "You need to see what you're fighting for," Victoria insisted. "Not just a property, but a legacy." My first visit to the mansion after the lockout battle was emotional. The caretakers welcomed me with genuine warmth, expressing relief that Eleanor's wishes were being honoured. Walking through the rooms filled with history and beauty, I felt my grandmother's presence and certainty that I was doing the right thing. The first court hearing came a month after James filed for divorce. My legal team presented evidence of James's financial deception, not just the emptied savings account, but previously hidden tax documents showing his business had been failing for years before my inheritance. The judge, a stern older woman with penetrating eyes, saw through the financial maneuvers immediately. Mr. Preston, she addressed James directly, these financial disclosures are concerning. You've concealed substantial business debts from your spouse, while simultaneously making claims against her separate inheritance. This court looks unfavourably on such tactics. To his attorney, she added, Counsel, I suggest you advise your client about frivolous claims and acting in good faith. Inherited properties explicitly bequeathed to one spouse rarely qualify as marital assets in this jurisdiction, as you well know. James looked physically ill by the hearing's end. His attorney requested a brief recess to discuss settlement options with his client. In the hallway, I saw Diana berating both James and the lawyer, her voice carrying despite her attempts to whisper. The court battle was draining emotionally and financially. Though my grandmother had left me comfortable legal fees mounted quickly, James, backed by his parents' resources, seemed determined to drag out proceedings to pressure me into settlement. Each motion and counter-motion extended the timeline, keeping me in painful limbo. In this dark period, I found unexpected solace in the Nantucket property itself. Victoria suggested I spend time there connecting with Eleanor's spirit, and despite my initial reluctance to leave during legal proceedings, my attorneys encouraged the break. At the mansion, exploring rooms I'd known since childhood, I discovered Eleanor had left more than property, she'd left wisdom. In her private study, I found journals dating back decades chronicling her own battles over the estate. William, her third husband, suggested again that we sell the impractical Nantucket property she'd written in 1973. When I refused, he implied I was being selfish and emotional. Perhaps I am emotional about my family home, but I recognize his interest is purely financial. Mother warned me about marrying a man who looks at a home and sees only a price tag. Reading her words, I felt less alone. My grandmother had faced similar pressures and stood firm. Her strength became my blueprint. The turning point in my struggle came 6 months after the lockout incident. The court ruled definitively that the Nantucket property was separate inheritance, not marital property, subject to division. The judge's opinion was unambiguous. The respondent has provided no credible evidence of contribution to or interest in the inherited property. The petitioner's inheritance remains her separate property, exempt from division in these proceedings. James's reaction was immediate. A settlement offer delivered the same day. He would drop all claims to the property in exchange for a one-time payment of $5 million. The amount was significant, but far less than the 50% he'd initially demanded. My attorneys advised considering the offer to end the ongoing legal battle. This could drag on through appeals, but Sydney warned. The property will remain yours, but the legal costs and emotional toll might make settlement worth considering. I was weighing the options when Diana made her final desperate move. Security cameras at the Nantucket mansion captured her attempting to enter through a garden door at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. The caretaker, alerted by the security system, called local police, who arrested her for attempted breaking and entering. Diana's public arrest, complete with a newspaper photo of her being escorted to a police car in handcuffs, still wearing her designer pajamas, shattered the Preston family's careful facade. Within hours, James called me directly, bypassing our attorneys. Please drop the charges, he begged. She's humiliated enough. This will destroy what's left of her reputation. James, I didn't press charges. She was caught breaking into a property in the middle of the night. That's a police matter. She's my mother, Amelia. Whatever is between us, please don't punish her. The desperation in his voice was new. For the first time, he seemed to recognize the consequences of their actions. After a long pause, I asked the question that had been haunting me. Why, James? Why did you turn on me like this? We were happy. His sigh seemed to come from somewhere deep and broken. It wasn't just about the money, not at first. When your grandmother left you, everything Mom became obsessed. She saw it as Eleanor deliberately snubbing our family. Then she started talking about their financial problems, how Dad's investments had failed, how they might lose their house. And you never told me any of this. Mom made me promise. Family loyalty and all that. Then she started connecting everything. My firm's struggles, their mortgage, my student loans, making it seem like your inheritance was the answer to all of it. She kept saying, a good wife would share that your refusal showed you never really loved me. The truth was both simpler and more painful than I'd imagined. James hadn't been a mastermind of deception. He'd been a puppet torn between loyalty to his manipulative mother and his marriage vows. I'll talk to the prosecutor, I said finally. I can't make promises, but I'll explain that I don't want to pursue maximum charges. Thank you, James whispered. And Amelia, I'm sorry for everything. The apology came too late to save our marriage, but it helped me release some of the bitterness I'd been carrying. I spoke with the prosecutor as promised, and Diana eventually received probation and community service rather than jail time, partly due to her previously clean record and age. The day after our conversation, James's sister Lauren reached out requesting to meet privately. We chose a cafe in a neighbouring town to avoid gossip. Lauren arrived looking exhausted but determined. "I need to tell you something about my mother," she began without preamble. "This isn't the first time she's done this." Over the next hour, Lauren revealed the family dynamics I'd never fully understood. Diana had systematically controlled the family through financial manipulation for decades. William had once been a successful investment banker, but suffered a professional setback in the early 90s. Rather than supporting him, Diana used the opportunity to take control of family finances, creating dependency that evolved into emotional control. She did the same thing with James's first serious girlfriend in college, Lauren explained. Catherine came from money, but when she received a trust fund payment, Mum convinced James she was selfish for not helping with his student loans. When Catherine refused to change the terms of her trust, Mum orchestrated their breakup. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. Lauren looked down ashamed. "I should have warned you years ago. I watched it happening again and kept quiet because, well, it's easier to not be Mum's target. After seeing what they did to you, I can't stay silent anymore. It's a sickness, this family's relationship with money and control." Lauren's revelations helped me understand, but didn't change my path forward. The divorce proceeded, and I accepted a modified settlement, $1 million to James, less than 1% of the property's value, but enough to repay his parents' loans and give him a fresh start away from Diana's influence. While the legal battles progressed, I began bringing Eleanor's vision for the property to life. I hired restoration experts to address needed repairs, focusing first on the historic gardens that had been my grandmother's pride. During the renovation of the east wing, workers discovered a hidden room containing additional art pieces, including early works by Georgia O'Keeffe and Frida Kahlo that had been presumed lost. The discovery added millions to the collection's value, but more importantly, connected me deeper to Eleanor's passion for supporting female artists. The threatening notes that had occasionally appeared in my mailbox stopped after the restraining order was expanded to include any contact, direct or indirect. James moved to Seattle for a fresh start with a new architectural firm, sending a brief email that he was seeking the personal growth I should have pursued years ago. Diana and William retreated from local society events, the scandal of the arrest and Diana's probation too humiliating to face. Lauren remained the only Preston who maintained contact, occasionally visiting to help with cataloguing Eleanor's extensive library. On the day the final divorce papers arrived, I found myself alone in the mansion, sitting in Eleanor's favourite garden chair overlooking the Atlantic. The grief I expected was there, but something else too, a sense of liberation. That evening, in a private ceremony of closure, I burned my wedding photos in the great stone fireplace, watching 7 years of memories transform into embers. "Thank you, Grandma," I whispered to the presence I always felt in those rooms. "You knew what I would need before I did." 6 months after my divorce was finalised, the Nantucket mansion had been transformed, not into the cold museum Diana had predicted, but into a living tribute to Eleanor's vision. The main house was partially renovated, preserving historical elements, while updating systems for sustainability. Eleanor's art collection was professionally curated with select pieces loaned to museums, as she had often done during her lifetime. The most significant change was the conversion of the property's guest cottage into an artist residency program offering 6-month fellowships to emerging female artists. The first cohort had just arrived 4 women from diverse backgrounds, each bringing unique perspectives and talents to spaces once reserved for society's elite. "Eleanor would absolutely love this," Victoria declared during the small opening reception, using privilege to create opportunity that was her philosophy in a nutshell. My personal healing progressed alongside the property's renewal. Therapy had helped me process the trauma of betrayal and recognize the subtle manipulation I'd endured. I'd made new friends among the local artists and restoration specialists, building a community separate from the social circles Diana had poisoned against me. I began dating casually, nothing serious, but enough to remind me that connection was still possible. A landscape architect working on the garden restoration had asked me to dinner twice, and his genuine interest in the property's history rather than its value was refreshingly different from what I'd grown accustomed to. James maintained his distance, sending occasional updates through attorneys, but respecting the boundaries I'd established. His final letter had been surprisingly reflective. I hope someday you can forgive me, though I don't expect it. What happened between us has forced me to examine parts of myself I've avoided my whole life. I'm trying to become someone better, someone worthy of the love you offered that I couldn't properly value. I never responded, still uncertain whether forgiveness was possible or even necessary for my healing. Some doors needed to remain closed while I rebuilt my life. Diana, however, couldn't maintain the same respectful distance. At a community fundraiser for the local art museum, my first public event since the divorce, I found myself face to face with her near the champagne table. She looked older, the public humiliation having etched new lines around her mouth, but her posture remained regal. Amelia, she acknowledged with a tight nod, I see you're enjoying your windfall. It was never about money, Diana, I replied calmly. It was about respecting my grandmother's wishes and her legacy. A convenient position when you're the one with the inheritance, she said with a bitter smile. You've certainly made your point. Our family has been thoroughly humiliated. That was never my intention. You made choices that had consequences. She adjusted her expensive bracelet, a nervous gesture I'd never seen before. James is in Seattle now. Did you know, starting over completely? William barely speaks anymore. Your victory is quite complete. This wasn't a war, Diana. It was a divorce and an inheritance dispute that didn't need to happen. Perhaps, she conceded with surprising weariness. But we can't change the past. Can we enjoy your empty mansion and your moral high ground? I hope they keep you warm at night. As she walked away, I realized her words no longer had power over me. The mansion wasn't empty. It was filled with purpose, creativity, and Eleanor's enduring spirit. And the moral high ground wasn't cold at all. It offered the clearest view of the path forward. In the year following the divorce, I balanced my time between our former home, where I maintained my graphic design practice, and the Nantucket property. Like my grandmother before me, I found travelling between the two brought perspective and prevented either place from becoming a gilded cage. The east wing of the mansion was converted into a gallery space, showcasing works by the resident artists alongside selections from Eleanor's collection. Our first public exhibition drew unexpected attention in the art world, with several major publications covering the innovative residency program. Through it all, Lauren remained a surprising ally and friend. Unlike her parents and brother, she had chosen truth over family mythology, risking Diana's wrath to maintain our connection. Mum still talks about the mansion like it was rightfully ours, she confided during one of her visits. She's created this alternative history where your grandmother somehow stole family property generations ago. It's sad, really, watching someone rewrite reality rather than accept it. On my 35th birthday, spent quietly at the mansion with Victoria and a few close friends, I made a discovery that brought my journey full circle. While organising Eleanor's personal papers, I found a sealed letter addressed to me in her distinctive handwriting, tucked inside her favourite volume of Emily Dickinson poems. To be opened when you need it most, the envelope read. Inside was a letter dated just 3 months before her death. My dearest Amelia, if you're reading this, you've likely encountered the challenges I anticipated when deciding to leave you the Nantucket property. Family inheritance often reveals character in unexpected ways, and I've observed enough of your husband and his mother to predict they may not celebrate your good fortune as true families should. Remember that this house is more than wood and stone. It's independence, security, and the freedom to define your own path. Your grandfather tried to pressure me to sell it when we married, much as others may pressure you. Standing firm was the first step in finding my true strength. Some will call you selfish for keeping what is rightfully yours. Some may even claim to love you while attempting to control your inheritance. True love never demands the sacrifice of your security or autonomy. I leave you this property not as a burden, but as a foundation upon which to build whatever life brings you joy. Should you eventually choose to sell it, do so because it serves your dreams, not someone else's. You have always seen the beauty in this home beyond its monetary value. That, my dear girl, is how I know I've chosen the right heir, not just to property, but to the understanding that our greatest wealth lies in creating beauty and opportunity that outlasts us. With eternal love, Grandmother Eleanor. Tears streamed down my face as I read her words. The guidance I'd been seeking had been waiting patiently for me to find it. Eleanor had anticipated the conflict and still chosen this path for both of us, knowing the challenges would forge something stronger than what came before. In that moment, I understood that my grandmother didn't just leave me a house worth millions. She left me the courage to define my own worth, something no one can ever take away from me. And that more than any property or possession is the true inheritance I'll carry forward. Looking out over the ocean from Eleanor's favourite spot in the garden, I felt a profound peace settle over me. The journey had been painful but necessary. I had lost a husband but reclaimed my power. I had faced betrayal but discovered authentic support. I had inherited a house but found a purpose. I wonder what inheritance battles you might have witnessed or experienced. Have you ever had to stand your ground against people who claim to love you? Drop a comment below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if my story resonated with you. Sometimes the most valuable inheritance isn't measured in dollars, but in the strength we find when everything else is tested. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find the courage to protect what matters most to you, whatever that may be.